listening to On the Couch with Carly. Carly's Couch is a safe space to talk. I'm a psychologist, but I'm not your pipe-smoking, tweed-wearing stereotype. Hello, and welcome back to On the Couch with Carly. Today we have Joseph Dana again, second time on the couch in recent times. If you haven't listened to it yet, I already have an episode with Joe that was, I think, featured in May this year called The Weight of History. And we spoke to the idea of the Holocaust and how it continues to this day to influence where Jewish people see themselves and their identities. And interestingly enough, that entire podcast, we didn't actually mention Gaza once, which is an interesting thing to do when it feels like that's what the whole world is talking about. But this week, Joseph has just created do you call it a blog? I don't know, what do you call it these days? A piece.
Well, it's a Substack. Yeah, it's a piece.
A piece on his Substack, which is titled, let me just get the title right for you guys. The title is When But Becomes Now, The Unraveling of American Jewish Denial. And interestingly, the very first line is, "It's genocide now." The email from a dear family member arrived without preamble last week. It's 3 words carrying the weight of a worldview collapsing. So in this piece, you go on to specifically talk about the genocide in Gaza and how Jewish people are coming to actually use that phrase and what this means. Do you want to, maybe in your own words, just explain the thesis of the article for our listeners? And firstly, welcome on the couch.
Thank you for having me. Feels like a great honor to be back for the second time. So before we start, I want to be very careful about what we're talking about, because it's such a sensitive issue from all sides, and that I feel like a lot of people have kind of their own vested interest in what is happening in the here and now on the ground in Gaza, in Palestine, in Israel. And no matter what we talk about, someone's going to feel like we're not talking about the right thing. So we just have to be very clear and to say that what we're talking about is one thing among many things to talk about. We're talking about the genocide in Gaza, specifically talking about what that means for the Palestinians, what that means for the Arab world, what that means for humanity is a critical topic that we should be discussing. Today, we're going to focus on one specific aspect that doesn't supersede anything else. It's not like, there's a genocide happening against Palestinians, let's talk about the Jews. That's not what's going on. So I just want to kind of put that out there. There's lots of room for lots of discussion. So today's discussion is I've been very reticent to talk about this too publicly and to write about it too publicly, just because it is quite an emotional topic that you need a lot of bandwidth to engage with. So I've been having a kind of back and forth over the last couple of years with a family member of mine who actually was a little upset that I ended up writing about this person, even though they're anonymous, which is another story we can talk about another time. And this family member, I think, is a really good example of where a lot of American Jews are. This person in specific, or as an aggregate of this society, very democratic, very kind of liberal when it comes to politics in the United States, yet raised in an environment in which the state of Israel and Zionism writ large is part and parcel of their understanding of being a Jew in America. It's part of their identity, right? And that exists in the UK, it exists in South Africa, it's all over the place. And so naturally there's been an extreme reticence to look at what's going on since October 7th from the lens of what's really happening on the ground. And there was a lot of discussion between me and this family member last year when South Africa took Israel to the ICJ over genocide. And, lots of very intellectual conversation about, is this plausibly accurate? And I'm going to be a legal scholar on what this actually means and all this kind of stuff. And then out of the blue, I get this email that just says, it's a genocide now. No prompting. And it was a response to an email thread that we had literally last year. And I found it to be really interesting because that's a huge jump for someone in this community to take, right? Again, we're focusing on one aspect of this community. We're not talking about the whole picture. Can't be said enough. And so I responded, and what this piece kind of outlines is I responded with the notion that this person would be ready to start thinking about the deeper debates over the legitimacy of Zionism itself. If you're raised in one of these Jewish communities that has such a deep allegiance to Zionism, so much so that you can be almost deluded or you can engage in really deep cognitive dissonance about the reality on the ground in Gaza right now, and not calling it a genocide or not calling it this or saying that it's justified or all of these different explanations that the mainstream Jewish community does or engages in. If you're able to break free of that in any sort of way and clearly state it's a genocide now, then to me that is a crumbling worldview, and that is an opening to have a much deeper and ultimately quite positive conversation about what does all this mean for Jewish identity. And that's really what it gets down to. And so I can continue and go into like what I showed him or what I wrote about in the piece if we want to, or we can take it in a different way.
Yeah.
It's up to you.
No, thanks for saying all of that. I think that's really useful. I just want to also say one thing, which I think is interesting, is, we are focusing on one thing, but I think the intention behind that focus, for me at least, and I think I'm in an interesting position in the sense that I would say, because I can kind of easily support and understand the pro-Palestinian side, doesn't mean that I am completely disconnected or unempathic or I'm not sort of like curious and interested about those who clearly I share lots of cultural identity with as Jewish people. But I think what I'm saying is that I sometimes feel like I'm in the middle between two very polarized positionalities on this topic. And one thing that I think is useful about being somewhat in the middle, and of course I'm not in the middle because there is no middle, but there's this feeling of being able to be empathic to both. And that is that because most of my friends are on the pro-Palestine side and most of the voices that I listen to are on that side, the one thing that I often find myself sort of defensively coming to, I find the defense coming up in me is people like to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. Anyone who supports Israel must be a genocidal, raving lunatic, right? Because how can you not just see what Israel is doing, right? And for me, it's about recognizing that it's so much more complicated than that for those individuals. And I hope our conversation today is going to illuminate how it's complex, that being an individual who identifies with particular ideologies or particular identities can sometimes get swept up into things without there being the true intention that we decide. I mean, and I'm not saying I think there are true genocidal maniacs amongst Israelis. I do believe that. I just don't believe that like all Israelis or all Jews who sort of don't come out swinging against Israel are doing so because they are bad people. I think they're doing so because of complicated identity and political and cultural reasons. And I think that's what I hope we're going to talk about today, if that makes sense.
Yeah, let me jump in on there, because what I presented to this family member is exactly getting to the heart of why we're in the situation when we can talk about a Jewish identity or a Jewish anything or our connection to the Israeli state, right? So as a way of getting into it, there's an anti-Zionist Orthodox rabbi named Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, who's been writing deeply on the issue of Zionism and Judaism. And so what's strange about this conversation is also exciting, is that the question of what it means to be a Jew in the modern world is an it's an unanswered question, and it's one that started really it started a very long time ago, but in this context, it started in the late 1800s. And so we almost have to go back in time and realize that conversation about the best way to be a Jew in the modern world, that hasn't ended, right? Even though we think that we're in this like post-identity phase. And so what Rabbi Shapiro is doing is that he is offering a religious take on essentially what this question means. What does it mean to be a Jew, right? And so I'm not advocating a position up or down. I'm saying that his arguments about this are very interesting, especially vis-a-vis Zionism. So let's just get into it. So in his estimation, in the religious estimation of what it means to be a Jew, or what Judaism is that it is a religion, right? It is a religious tradition that is defined by the Torah and the mitzvot, right? So you don't need anything else. You don't need language. You don't need territory. You don't need a flag. You don't need a common ethnicity. There is, in this estimation, again, this is just me reporting it, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but in this religious understanding, the only thing that makes a Jew is Yiddishkeit, right? Is Torah and mitzvot. You've been given the Torah by God. God explicitly says multiple times in the religious text, the Torah is what makes you a people, okay? So the Zionists didn't like this idea, and they actually engaged in an overt program to destroy this image of the Jew and replace it with a secular nationalist ideology, right? So they essentially embraced European anti-Semitic ideas of Jews. And in fact, if I can just have a small diversion, there's an incredible quote from Vladimir Jabotinsky, who was one of the early and major Zionist leaders and is now one of the most powerful and influential kind of Zionist leaders in the current Israeli mindset. The far right, Bibi Netanyahu, all these people love Jabotinsky. And he has this quote from 1905, and he says, to imagine what a true Hebrew is, and the word Hebrew is what they referred to as Zionist at that time. So to imagine what a true Zionist is, to picture his image in our mind, we have no example from which to draw. Instead, we must use, he uses a Hebrew word, but we must use the method of deriving something from its opposite. So we take the starting point of the Jew today, try to imagine in our minds his exact opposite, right? Let us erase from that picture all the personality traits that are so typical of Jews, and let us insert into it all the desirable traits whose absence is so typical in the Zionist. Because the Jew is ugly, sickly, lacks handsomeness. We shall endow the ideal image of the Zionist with masculine beauty, stature, massive shoulders, vigorous movements, bright colors, and shades of color. The Jew is frightened and downtrodden. The Zionist ought to be proud and independent. The Jew is disgusting to all. The Zionist should charm all. You get the idea. An incredible quote. I mean, this is just, and this is what the kind of Jewish response to Zionism is tapping into, is that this is anti-Semitic, essentially, right? And this is open. I mean, Jabotinsky did this. Theodor Herzl fantasized about eradicating traditional Jewish life. Max Nordau, who's a major early Zionist leader, medicalized Jewish existence as diseased. He referred to Jews as diseased people. So the early Zionist leaders really sought to destroy the image of the Jew and replace that image. And even if you talk with Zionists today, they will know about this, right? If you talk to people that love going to Israel, they say, oh, the Israelis are so attractive and they're tanned and they're strong. And like this idea has completely taken root inside of the Jewish mind. And it's very dangerous. So the reason I'm kind of explaining that is to explain that this reaction to what it means to be a Jewish person in the modern world, the Zionist reaction, is one based on European anti-Semitism, an internalization of European anti-Semitism, and an embrace and creation of a European nationalist movement for the Jewish people. Before that, there was the idea of being Jewish as a national identity did not exist and arguably still doesn't exist, right? So like the state of Israel, on your ID card in the state of Israel, they have a portion on your ID card that says nationality, right? So you could be Palestinian or you could be Druze. If you're an Israeli Jew, it doesn't say Israeli, right? The state of Israel is the nation, but it doesn't say Israeli, it says Jewish. But being Jewish is not a nationality, right? This is a fundamental crux that we haven't figured out. And there is a point to what you were talking about. I'm getting to that point in terms of when we think of our identity, right? Because they by themselves created this idea of a nationality for Jewish people, they have sought to entrench it with the Israeli state. So what does that mean? You talk to a lot of Jews around the world, secular Jews like you and I, or like people that are into Zionism, whatever, when they go to Israel, they often report that they feel Jewish there, right? I hear this all the time, like, oh, it just feels Jewish. So you see Hebrew and there's the Israeli flag with the Star of David, and I just feel really Jewish there. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, from like the way that Judaism kind of operates, that's a complete construction of the state of Israel, right? Mm-hmm. And it's done so that Israel can claim to represent all Jews, right? So like when Benjamin Netanyahu goes to the U.S. Congress or the United Nations, he will say, I am a representative of the Jewish people. And that is a patently false statement. The Jewish people have never elected Benjamin Netanyahu to represent them. So it's a bit of an esoteric concept, but it's a pretty wild concept, and it feeds into why we feel these connections to this place, right? So I'll just make another point to it, which is kind of like Israel is the only state in the world that claims to speak on behalf of people that are not its citizens, right? So like the country of Italy doesn't speak on behalf of people of Italian descent in the United States, right? Or Saudi Arabia doesn't speak on behalf of all Muslims, right? But Israel does. Israel says that it is the nation state of the Jewish people, and therefore it speaks in the name of all Jews, which is not true. As a Jew in South Africa, I haven't elected the Israelis to represent me. But then what happens is we get to a situation like Gaza, where it will literally say, and Israeli politicians say this all the time, we're defending the Jewish people. So automatically, as a non-Israeli Jew outside of the country, I'm implicated in their crimes in Gaza. I'm automatically tied into their crimes in Gaza, right? This is an incredibly unusual situation. It doesn't exist with other states. It's completely unique. I'm probably rambling. Yeah.
No. And I think that's exactly it. I think that's the departure point. So there's human beings being represented by a system and mascots of that system going out into the world and saying, I speak for all of these people. And then us in our individual bodies are going, well, that doesn't feel right. Like, I don't feel okay with that. I mean, I think people do ask the question, like, what's the big deal? Like, why are we all focused on Israel? And, but I think that it is very evocative when you are being co-opted into something without any buy-in, and that it's disgusting. It's viscerally, really abhorrent. And so what is your choice then in this experience as a person who's being told, oh, I'm doing this for you, that you are being represented by these actions that feel like the last thing that I would like to be representing me. But I just want to go back a little bit, because I just want to explain one thing, because I think my listeners might have missed it, which is that you spoke about the two aspects of, from a religious point of view, what are the two aspects of what makes Jews, which is the Rabbi Shapiro's thesis. But you spoke about mitzvot, which I think is an important word to just define and translate, which is that it's a Hebrew word that means like do-gooding, right? Like good deeds, like virtuous
Not
deeds, right?
It means it's commandments. So Judaism is a very formulaic religion compared to, let's say, Christianity. Like there's not a lot of this is taken it's taken root among secular Jews now because we live in Christian societies. But this idea that I can have a personal belief in God and that's enough is not how Judaism, from an Orthodox standpoint, works. It's a very formulaic and law-bound religion in which 613 commandments were given by God to the Jews. That's a special relationship. They're given in the Torah. And to be a Jew and engage in that relationship, you carry out those commandments. And then there's a whole body of literature. What the religious Jews are doing all the time is studying how to best do those commandments, right? So like the Talmud and all of these works of Jewish legal scholarship are basically like, like the world is weird. Like some of the commandments aren't really clear. So they have to debate, and there's all of these very elaborate debates as to like, which way do you do it? Just as one example for people that might not know, like there's a commandment that says, do not cook a child in its mother's milk in reference to dietary laws, right? What does that mean? We don't really know. That's like someone, and so rabbis and sages, that they come up with these very complex legal decisions, and that kind of arrives to the fact that you shouldn't mix milk and meat. So that's why like religious Jews won't eat cheeseburgers, for example. So, but that's what it is. Yeah. So the religion is.
You shouldn't eat veal. You shouldn't be eating animals while they're still suckling off their mother's milk. Who knows? But yes,
exactly.
Agreed. So, I mean, there's nothing more Jewish than people coming to a definition and then arguing over its meaning and how to use it. So that's kind of maybe what we're doing here as well. I think the interesting thing about that kind of religious aspect of identity, and I hear what you're saying, it's like law-based, but I also think it's about, like, at its essence, it's about being a good person, right? It's about the reason you follow the laws and you follow the God's commandments is because that's what will make you a good person, right? Like that's the idea.
This is a beautiful, like an example of the issue here, right? That's a really nice and delicate way of looking at this from a modern perspective.
Okay.
Right? So we are stuck in a situation where this old kind of anti-modern religion, a religion of law and commandments, doesn't fit with a secular Western society. So we can dress it up and down in different ways of saying, well, it's actually these commandments make sense and they make us into better people. Sure, I mean, that's debatable in some situations. I mean, I would say that the role of women in this structure doesn't lead to like a more egalitarian society and a better society, but that is one way of looking at it. But the point is this, right, is that the Jewish religion has existed for millennia, okay? Zionism is 150 years old. Okay, yes. So for millennia, Jews have organized their societies around mitzvot and Torah and around these aspects of what it means to be a Jew. And a lot of these aspects are designed for preservation. One can say, well, what about anti-Semites? Okay, fine. Like there's a lot of commandments in the way that this is developed in that Jews shouldn't engage in fighting. Right? Because the whole thing is that Jews feel like they have this higher purpose to engage with God through the commandments and the observance of Torah. So the last thing they want to do, they're commanded not to fight with non-Jews or fight about whatever. The whole idea, and one of the reasons why Judaism has been preserved for millennia and been going for so long, is that it's internal, right? It's be loyal to the society that you're in. That's a very important thing, right? You're a Jew that has a covenant with God, but you can be an American, and you should be an American if you live in America. Or you can be a South African, and you should. This idea of being loyal to another thing is actually sacrilegious, right? And so we have this system that has really, I mean, for lack of, there's a lot of, anti-Semitism is a real thing. We can get into that. But the Jews are still here, and they've been doing this for a long time. Right? Sages, mystics, all of these people have been operating in exile with no need for a state, with no need for an army, right? For thousands of years. And now we're in a situation where these texts that have preserved us in this way have been perverted and changed to essentially enable ethnic cleansing. And that's how I end this piece, actually. And I say, we have been able to survive for thousands of years with no need to ethnically cleanse another people. Zionism now demands that of us. Zionism is demanding the ethnic cleansing and the genocide and the erasure of the Palestinian people. And I don't know, I think it's an open question whether or not we can withstand that as Jews for all of these different reasons, right? In terms of like the idea of making a Jew into a national identity and all of the things that go part and parcel with the maintenance of the Zionist regime.
But that's kind of what I was saying, and I mean, I was trying to oversimplifying it, but just this by saying like the reason why this is at odds with our religious identity is that it doesn't feel like we can survive kind of hitching our wagon to a genocidal, ethnic cleansing identity, like perpetrator identity, you know. And I think that's because I don't think that that's written into the religious texts, and that's not because ultimately, and I guess maybe this goes beyond religion, because I mean I don't really have a huge amount of time for organized religion, but I think the idea of like maybe where this goes into a bit more of like the spirit or the soul of the Jewish people, like what I'm seeing in terms of what you've spoken about in your piece is this shift in rhetoric where more and more Jewish people, particularly Jewish celebrities, are coming out and saying how awful it feels to be co-opted into this identity that, as you said, is now being clearly before our eyes. It's like in order to exist in this way, we are supposed to be okay with ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. Or at the very least, just considering them non-human, you know, as a start. That just feels completely at odds with how we've always been taught to be good, to be a good person, to be thoughtful, mindful, aware, and how I think, like how it feels to be Jewish. It doesn't feel like that's what it means to be Jewish.
I mean, this is where these people like Rabbi Shapiro, who represents a big trend of religious Jews, get it very right. I mean, he and people like him very clearly say that the Zionist movement is one of the most anti-Semitic ideologies in history, that the goal of the Zionist movement is, they use this word, this Hebrew word shmad, to annihilate the Jewish people, right? And this isn't just me like, you know, you say that to a Zionist around now and they would be aghast. But think about the quote that I just read from Jabotinsky, who is one of the ideological forefathers of the country, who literally says the Jew is ugly, the Jew is terrible, the Jew is all of these things. Their idea was to replace the Jew, right, with a new nationality.
Is there any use in sort of separating out some ideas around Zionism, that maybe there is political Zionism, there's like the Zionism that's mentioned in the Torah, are there different kinds of Zionism?
We can talk about, there is no Zionism mentioned in the Torah.
Okay, not Zionism, but there's Zion mentioned in the Torah, right? There's like the place Zion. Is that not?
Not really.
I mean, don't ask me about the Torah, but I
mean, sort of. You have Eretz HaKodesh, like you have the Holy Land, but the issue in terms of actual state enterprise, the state of the Jews, or a state, it can only be created by the Messiah, right? So it in no way, shape, or form could it be understood as a secular state like we have now. And this is a big point that they jump on that gets very confusing, right? Is that like when you see on Friday and the Jews around town will like share Shabbat Shalom memes, they often say, Am Israel Chai, or the nation of Israel lives. And that's understood now as like the state of Israel lives. But when that phrase came into being, there was no such thing as a nation state. Nation states are new. When the Torah was written, whenever it was, or whoever it was by, we can get into that another day. But like when that was written, there was no such thing as national borders or national identity. In fact, the word Am was used to describe any sort of society. You could have like an Am of women that would do something on Shabbos or something like. These are all totally new European terms that the Zionists have then applied like retroactively to a text from 4,000 years ago. It doesn't make any sense.
Yes. But let's just say it makes sense to the people who've adopted it. So let's try to understand it from their perspective, because they're like, me and you are here, but there are thousands of Jewish people around the world who identify with that phrase as meaning something that they can relate to. So like, if we just suspend the disbelief, what is it that they relate to? Like, what is the meaning for a person that like has almost, I guess, I don't know if it's a lack of critical thinking skills, or if it's just like how you're raised and then that's just what you learn and you adopt it. But like, what is this thing that we're adopting as a Jewish people who believe in Zionism? Not like, honestly, I believe there's a lot of Jewish people who don't think of Zionism meaning the eradication of the Palestinian people. They think of Zionism as like this, as you said, this like really good, like Israel. It's just this really, which it is. It's like a nice country, like a good, like a success story. Like how Jewish people talk about their children. Like, look at Israel.
Yeah.
Look at how it's doing. It's doing so well. Like, it's so successful. It made such a success in such a short time. Like, we're proud of it. We identify with it. We see it as as to do with the Holy Land from the Bible. Tell me, like, go into their minds. What is it that they see and feel?
Well, it's hard to go into their minds because a lot of what they're seeing and believing is the result of a very manipulative movement that has its own goals. And this is why this Rabbi Shapiro guy is so prickly and so apt, is that like, to be a Jewish person from the religious standpoint, you don't pine for a state, right? That's not like, our religion isn't designed around this idea of like having a state as the ultimate manifestation of the religion. It's not a religious goal. It's not a religious edict, right? The religious goals and the edicts are actually very straightforward. You have a relationship with God, like we were talking about with the Torah, and you follow the commandments, and that's it, right? So replacing that, so the problem is that goal to follow those goals is very hard in the modern world, right? Since the advent of European modernity and the rise of Christianity that allows things to be internalized, I can have a relationship with Jesus and do my own thing and then do Jesus stuff, all that kind of stuff. Like, we don't have that. Our religion and our structure of community doesn't work well with that. So that's why we have all these ideas as to how do we make ourselves like integrate better. Also for safety, like for, an important thing, because anti-Semitism is a whole thing. That's a whole debate that we can talk about. But also just to integrate into society. So Zionism is an approach to that. Zionism is like, let's make the religion into something that works like the other European national states, where there is this goal to have this viable, beautiful, economically healthy country, right? But that's not Jewish. See, this is the problem. They take all these Jewish elements because they need that buy-in, but it's not a Jewish thing. And this is where the disconnect. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
I hear you from a definition perspective, but I'm saying there's a lived experience that would argue with you and say yes. If we just splitting hairs in terms of like what is actually true from in terms of how we define ourselves, I think we can argue as you have with along the lines of the Shapiro Rabbi Shapiro. But what I'm suggesting is that there is, how long has Israel been? 150 years. So there's like 150.
That's Zionism. Israel
since 1948. How long is that?
Yeah.
70-something years.
Like 70 years. Yeah.
Okay. So for 70-something years, there has been a lived experience of people both outside of Israel and in Israel who support the notion that this is that whatever it is that they're doing, and we've acknowledged that it isn't necessarily right or just. It's certainly not just to the Palestinian people. It has never been from the beginning, but it also is not necessarily just in terms of how it claims to represent Jewish people. But that's besides the point. I'm saying there are people who live in Israel. There are people who identify as Israeli. There are people who don't live in Israel who identify Israel as having significance to them for whatever reason whether they were manipulated or not. This is meaningful to them. What I'm trying to say is there is a lived experience, and there are human beings that exist and have families and have lives and have, experiences that are valid, I believe, who have bought into this idea, whether it is right or wrong, they've bought into the idea. And now they are facing a very new reality, really. I mean, it's an ongoing reality that has been kind of up and down for the last 70 something years. But at this very moment in time, the world of non-Jews, and now increasingly more and more Jews, are shifting their perspectives in terms of how this lived experience, where they've just sort of assumed and accepted that Israel is this thing that it says it is to them, meaningful to them in the way it says it should be meaningful to them, is suddenly at odds with how they see themselves, with their worldview, with their sense of morality, with their sense of ethics, with their sense of like how they, even construe what it means to be Jewish, Zionist, or liberal, for example,
Look, I think a big part of this, I think a big part of the realization is that the buy-in that a lot of people have had. I agree with you that there's a real emotional element to a lot of the relationships between non-Israeli Jews and the state of Israel. There is definitely that. I think the realization that a lot of people are having as a result of what's happening in Gaza is one that is typified by the deep lack of understanding that many people have about Israel. And let me preface that. Some of the most aggressive Zionists that I know, the most aggressive ones, people you can't talk to about this because they will end your relationship or whatever, don't speak Hebrew nor read Hebrew. So this is a really wild example of the nature of the emotional connection. How could I possibly have an emotional connection to a country? Let's say it's France. Let's say I identify as somehow connected to France, and I have a French flag, and I send my child to a French school where they learn the French national anthem, and they write letters to French soldiers, but I didn't speak French. How could that possibly exist? How would I know what they're actually saying in France? I wouldn't. And this is exactly what you have with the majority, I would say, of Jews outside of Israel in terms of their relationship with the state of Israel. None of my family members speak any Hebrew. I've got family members now that are like way off the deep end in terms of their extreme right-wing Zionism, rah-rah Israel stuff. Family members here, I'm surrounded by a lot of very extreme Zionists, have no idea, couldn't read an Israeli newspaper. How can I identify and make a cornerstone of my identity for a place that I fundamentally don't understand what they're saying? It doesn't make any sense. So because this is a reality, it's an unmitigated fact, we have to then look at how has this come to pass, right? How did this happen? A large part of it happened by this incredibly shrewd ability of the Zionist regime to co-opt what it is to be Jewish, is to completely associate anything to be Jewish with the state of Israel. They've done that incredibly well. And what we have now, whereby we have a genocide happening in front of our eyes that's becoming almost impossible to ignore, and people that have had this identity are starting to say, well, what is this place? What have I been supporting? It's very challenging. Now, because it's so ingrained, it's not like it comes up as this fully formed idea of maybe I really didn't know a lot about that. This is their identity. Like you said, they've been raised thinking that this place is one thing when it in fact is another. So like I said, it's just such when we talk about why are we always talking about Israel? Why are we always talking about Gaza? Number one, there's not any, the level of genocide that's happening. I mean, it's a weird thing to say, but the level of genocide that's happening in Gaza is pretty unique. So that's one reason to talk about it. And then the other thing is that Israel just has all of these incredibly weird, strange, and unique things about it. Like I said with the example of Italy representing all Italians. There's no other state in the world that says, right, I'm a Jewish people and the Israelis go on TV. Benjamin Netanyahu says, I represent you. I don't even speak your language. How do you represent me? What are you talking about? I can't read your newspapers. I don't watch your TV. I have no idea what your culture actually looks like. How do you represent me? How does that work?
Well, I think this is really the point, and I can hear in your voice how I think that I watched this Mandy Patinkin interview with, I can't remember, I think it was the New York Times, and he started shouting, but like, when someone is just like raging, and his anger was about witnessing the devastation in Gaza and the degree to which that resonates with and reminds him of what he saw depicted of the Holocaust, and his sense of connection to the Holocaust, which goes back to our original podcast, that's something that we're taught, that it's actually part of our identity, is the idea of the Holocaust. And then you're witnessing these acts, and then you've got Benjamin Netanyahu saying, I'm doing these things to the Palestinian people on your behalf.
Right. And we never signed up for it. It's unbelievable.
It is beyond uncomfortable to exist in that reality. So, but yet people have been accepting that until recently. There's been a lot. So I wanted to just actually read a couple of phrases, a couple of sections from your piece, which I thought were really useful. So number one, I just highlighted the elaborate architecture of denial and cognitive dissonance that has sustained American Jewish support for Israel, despite mounting evidence of its crimes, is beginning to crack. What emerges from these fissures challenges not just political positions, but the very foundations of how Jewish communities have understood Jewish identity itself, which is something you've obviously already spoken to today. Israel's law of return crystallizes this perverse logic by granting automatic citizenship to any Jew worldwide while denying it to Palestinians whose families lived there for generations. Israeli military actions are routinely justified as protecting the Jewish people rather than Israeli citizens, transforming every Jew on earth into an unwilling stakeholder in policies they had no voice in creating. The systematic hijacking weaponizes Jewish identity in ways that would have horrified previous generations and is horrifying us. A religious and cultural identity that individuals might embrace, reject, or negotiate on their own terms becomes transformed into involuntary political membership. Every Jew worldwide finds themselves conscripted into a nationalist project they may never have chosen, their very existence cited as justification for policies they may abhor. The concrete dangers of this arrangement manifest every time Israel commits an atrocity while claiming to act for all Jews. Each synagogue vandalized in response to Israeli violence, each Jewish cemetery desecrated, each anti-Semitic incident sparked by conflating Jews with Israeli policies validates that's the Rabbi Shapiro's central insight. Zionism hasn't protected Jews, but rather transformed them into permanent targets by binding their identity to a state's actions. So this is, very well written. I really enjoy the way you put it. It really gets it right. My question is, because I think this is so important, is this idea that why? Why are they granting us immediate citizenship? Why are we being pulled into this? It's it feels like monopoly, and they're just hoarding representation on the board. And in your mind, what might be some of the more, if we just zoomed out, there's obviously we can kind of understand the political agenda from the state of Israel's perspective, and particularly this right-wing government. But zooming out, you're an American citizen. A lot of Americans are deeply uncomfortable because of America's complicity in the genocide in Gaza. What are some of the major players other than the state of Israel itself? And why is this sort of co-opting upon co-opting happening? And to what end? What is the end game here?
Well, there's a lot of questions in that question.
Sorry.
Look, The Israelis, the Zionists, have been doing this since the beginning. Bear in mind that a lot of early Zionist leaders just wanted to assimilate, right? Herzl, the famous story is that he had a Christmas tree, and he just wanted to be an Austrian person. And the anti-Semites didn't allow that because he had this taint of being Jewish, right? And so they had to come up with a new way of essentially assimilating. And their idea was a smart one from that perspective, which was, let's just make a national enterprise ourselves. But in order to do that, they determined that they had to really control and redefine and kind of orient Jewish identity around them. I mean, it's actually an amazing thing when you think about it throughout the course of Jewish history that they single-handedly created an idea of Jewish national identity and then said everything related to Judaism flows from this, flows from us. We control it all. And that's what I'm getting to in those quotes that you read about how they've done all this stuff with no asking, right? It wasn't like, let's do this. There was no Jewish Congress that was like, let's do this collectively. There was no buy-in. So they do it in our names. They do it by themselves. And then when you raise your voice or you say, hey, wait a second, I don't like how you're committing a genocide against these people in my name, then it's you're anti-Semitic or you're anti-Zionist or you're a self-hating Jew. That whole self-hating Jew slight is a representation of real, I don't know what the psychological term is, but it's almost psychotic, right? Someone says, I don't want to be involved in this. You're doing something without my consent. I'm not a part of your society. I'm not a citizen of your country. You're doing it in my name. And the response is, you're a self-hating Jew. As if they themselves are the only arbiter of who is a Jew and who's not. So the religious guys will come in and be like, actually, you guys are full of shit because the religious texts don't give you any authority whatsoever. So that's one aspect of your question. The other aspect is more towards like, why is the American government supporting all this kind of stuff? Or like, why is that what you're getting at? Like, why are we?
Yes, it's like a geopolitical question, but it also speaks to maybe some of the like lefty narratives that I've been picking up on around like white settler colonial thinking and like, is Israel just a white settler colonial project? Is it just white supremacy? Is it just is it a European nationalist movement? Like, and then if it is, then is that just because Herzl and those oaks wanted to be like the rest of them? It's like a really sick joke is basically like Israel's basically doing what all the other Western nations did. It's just late to the party, and so it's getting a raw deal, you know. But that's also just so problematic. But to me, it feels like there is greater narratives at play here. I don't know if that's maybe conspiracy theory vibes, but that's what
No, there's not conspiracy theory vibes at all. Look, I mean, first and foremost, the American interest, along with the Western European interest, because the Western European states have been just as involved in all this,
yes.
is a financial one, especially in the U.S. case. America is essentially a military arms factory parading or pretending to be a nation state. And if you make weapons in every single state of the United States, and that is such a major part of your economy, selling weapons to a small group of people that will abide by no international standards, or no international legal norms, is a great business, right? I mean, people are making a lot of money. And it is very important to always and continuously remind ourselves of what's going on when it comes to Israel. Israel is a country that has no recognized borders. It has never even said what it would want its recognized borders to be. That's an important point, right? Because you could say, oh, they're in flux and they're at war. The Israeli leadership has never said, we would like the border to be on the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River and then end in wherever. They've never said that. Will they take Sinai again? Who knows? Southern Syria, still on the table. Iraq, never know. So it's this entity that has no borders, right, that is in absolute violation of essentially every international legal norm when it comes to warfare. It's bombed preemptively and with essentially no real warning as all of its neighbors. It's committing a genocide in Gaza, and it has an arsenal of nuclear weapons that it's never disclosed, nor lets nuclear watchdog authorities, international authorities, into check. So this is a country that like basically doesn't play by any accepted international norm whatsoever. You know, it's funny because they say the Iranians do that, but like the scale of how these people behave is just so different. So if you're the U.S. or you're France, I mean, France has a huge weapons industry. This is a great thing to support, right? We will happily support this kind of narrative. Then the icing on the cake for these Western European societies is the ethno-nationalism. Israel is an ethno-nationalist state, and America, as a white Christian country, loves supporting ethno-nationalist states. Rhodesia, apartheid South Africa, I mean, wherever. There's never really been a white ethno-nationalist state that America won't enthusiastically support, right? So Israel fits into that nicely, and then you also have that in Europe as well. I mean, last time we talked about the relationship between Israel and Hungary. Hungary has become an extremely nationalist, racist state, one of the biggest supporters in Europe of the Israelis. And so you have those confluence of things where it's like, I love selling weapons to these people because they fit my, mold, and they'll buy weapons until there's no tomorrow. So I think that's where the hard practical reality comes into that. And then there's a whole other aspect, which is the tech aspect. That's not even weapons, right? I mean, like, the Israeli tech ecosystem is huge. It's very connected to the American tech ecosystem, also the Chinese tech ecosystem. That's another thing. All of that tech is tested out, is combat tested, is designed in the occupied territories. The famous example is the app Waze, which Google bought for $2 billion. That was the creation of two guys that were in the military intelligence unit 8200, and they designed that while in that unit. So, if the occupation goes away, if the genocide goes away, if that constant management, that myriad of control over the Palestinian life goes away, the Israeli tech ecosystem takes a major hit, which would have a knock-on effect on the American tech ecosystem. So there's a lot of very deep and real economic interests that are not unusual to Israel, right? They happen in other places, vis-a-vis the United States and other countries. In Israel, they're just on 11, right? Because the Israelis just do all these things. So it's not like to say there's some sort of collusion and like weird, I don't know, it's not like some anti-Semitic thing. It's that they do this stuff.
Okay, but thank you so much for speaking to all of those bits, because I think it was a very synthesized response that actually speaks to a lot of what I've been reading, seeing. But you sort of get this, you pick this up kind of here and there, and it's nice just to hear it being said all in one go, that like, and I think most importantly, I just want to say something. So think about what Joseph just said, and then I want to read the last paragraph that I want to point out from his piece. For more than a century, Jewish communities worldwide have been subjected to a form of emotional blackmail that equates questioning Israel with betraying one's own people. This manufactured equation has silenced moral voices precisely when they were most needed, enabling escalating violence while condemning those who object as self-hating traitors to their own identity. When you think about the financial vested interests of the West, when you think about I think the one thing you didn't mention is maybe also, like you sort of mentioned as an ethno-state, but the idea of like Islamophobia and just how important that is in sort of keeping the West in their supremacist state as well. Like I think there's this significance of this Jewish, although they are definitely not homogenous in any way, the Israeli people, but like this Jewish state sort of being the only non-Muslim state in the Middle East, being sort of like representative symbolically of people's, what I feel, internalized Islamophobia around like, we can't let them have it all, like we've got to keep our stronghold, which is such a bizarre, it's such a bizarre concept, but I think a lot of people do identify with that, a lot of people. And I think we also underestimate how conservative people are, how right-wing people are. I think we're seeing a huge upsurgence in right-wing and conservative views. But I think if I can just, I suppose I feel like I want to appeal to people that when you feel like you are sticking to your team, so to speak, when you're like not jumping on the bandwagon of criticism towards Israel as a state, how it conducts its military operations, things like that. If you are under the impression that you are maintaining allegiance because of being Jewish, I think that you have to understand that that is a con, and it is dangerous. It is causing harm, and there are clearly other interests at play, and your Jewish identity is being used. And so that is anti-Semitic in my mind.
Well,
And
that's why he says it's the most, yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
which is what you've been saying, which is what Rabbi Shapiro says. I can't believe I agree with Rabbi Shapiro, but I do.
But I mean, like to that point, though, I think it's also really important if one finds themselves in that situation to also take solace in the perspective of time, right? Zionism is only 150 years old. Judaism, I mean, it's 57 something or another in the count. It's a 5,700 and something this year in the Jewish calendar. So we're talking about thousands of years of people that didn't have to have their Jewish identity questioned by whether or not they love the state of Israel and Zionism. So it's always important to keep that perspective and find solace in the depth of Jewish life extending throughout the ages. And you can find this stuff in books, and you can find this stuff with people that you might not agree with in terms of their religious perspectives, but they are still upholding those traditions, and they exist, and they like to talk about this stuff. And so this idea that the Israelis and the state of Israel and Zionism is the only voice, and they get to decide all this stuff, is just not real. And we have to move back beyond that. And ironically, we might be in a situation, which is what spurred this piece, of the Israelis' moral character being so dismal and compromised that people are, like Jews, are finally realizing that they aren't the representation. So we might be in that issue. You know, when I have my family members saying it's a genocide now, that is the opening to be like, yep, okay, let's look at what else these people do and how else they behave in the world.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a ramble you were saying.
No, absolutely. And I also just want to say to all of those of us who are sitting here going, okay, so now, you know, philosophically, ideologically, I'm on board, you know, and I completely feel legitimate in being able to say, this is not acceptable and I do not want to put my name to this. But then going like, okay, so what now? I still am left with this extreme level of helplessness, this extreme sense of like, defeatedness of like, well, these systems are just so massive and so just out of our control and out of our power. I just want to acknowledge that like, probably I saw this quote the other day, which was like, the sad thing is not that people are supporting this. The sad thing is that so many people don't support this and nothing is happening, like nothing changes. And so I just want to acknowledge that we might be like, you know, talking about this sort of the meaning of it here and like getting to sort of this place where we accept this position and knowing that it doesn't mean betraying your Jewish identity. And still we're left with sadness and grief and despair at what is going on, where we don't actually know whether it's going to change, how long it's going to be until it does change, and what the consequences are going to be for the people of Palestine, for the Palestinian people, for these children that are starving. It's devastating. It's devastating.
100%. There are real consequences to this. And it would be great to say that there's some sort of happy solution in terms of the identity. But like I said at the very beginning of our chat today, unfortunately, all of this stems back to issues that weren't resolved 150 years ago, which is, what do we do with our identity? What does it mean to be a Jewish person in this modern world? And there is no real answer to that. There's different attempts.
Yeah.
And maybe there will be in the future, but, you know, like I said, actually, if you want to, this is a perfect segue into the final paragraph of this piece, is that there is one thing that I think that we can do, which is, well, I don't know, I think it's in that paragraph. Do you want to read that? I think it speaks to this, and then I can...
The last paragraph of your piece?
Yeah, I think this is where I talk about it. Let's see if I remember correctly.
As Gaza burns and diaspora Jews confront their unwitting conscription into this horror, the stakes become undeniable. Our tradition weathered millennia without requiring ethnic cleansing as its foundation. It cannot weather much more of what Zionism demands in its name. Is that it? No?
Well, no, the bit about supporting Palestinian liberation because of Jewish values, not despite them.
Oh, sorry, that's the second last paragraph, Joseph.
Oh, sorry. I knew it was there somewhere.
Okay, great. The path forward demands that we distinguish Judaism from Zionism, not as an academic exercise, but as a lived experience. It requires supporting Palestinian liberation, not in spite of our Jewish values, but as their fullest expression. It means rebuilding Jewish communities around the ethical principles that sustained us through centuries of exile, rather than the ethnic solidarity that nationalism demands. Excellent.
Yes, I think that's our homework. I think that's a good.
That's it. Yeah.
That's a good spot. Yeah. That's what we need to do.
I'm down with that. Let's leave it at that. Thank you so much, and well done for writing this piece. And yeah, we'll continue
absolute pleasure. If everybody's interested in this, I'm going to write several more pieces around this subject. So drop a link to that. Just subscribe. It's free. Subscribe to my newsletter and it'll come right to you.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to On the Couch with Carly. If something in this episode resonated with you or made you feel less alone, that means the world to me. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and now in video format on YouTube. For exclusive content and resources, visit our website at onthecouchwithcarly.com. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider leaving a rating or review. It really does help others discover our safe space for authentic conversation. Until next time, please take good care of yourself. I can't wait to be back on the couch with you again.